The way forward. These lands were treacherous, filled with undead filth, unresting spirits of the night. But it was always night here, and daylight never shone in this place so dreadful. Dark entities and lost beings roamed the plains and mists of the fields here, losing their way and straying off into the nightly forest of the dead men. They too wandered aimlessly without cause, for they were damned, and none had the right to enter, except perhaps one. A young man, Thaddeus, had left his home earlier that day. It was a small village the size of only a few hundred. He had left primarily because he was bored, but also because he was lonely. It was a strange thing that he'd done, leaving like that, and he supposed that he was old enough to go, that he'd saved up enough money for the trek, but uncertainties plagued him, and he did not know his way. Perhaps this is how he discovered this dark and terrifying abode, though no one knew exactly what the place, or how position in it was achieved, or rather, forced upon oneself. No, it was a strange place, and the changes to the world around Thaddeus only became noticeable by the time that it was too late to turn back. He was here in the land of the damned. What is this place? He remembered asking himself when he had first arrived. Where have I gone? A feeling of fear rushed over him, and he took great pains and cautions to remain unseen and unheard, invisible to the spectres who awaited him and wished to feast upon him. He was unaware of all this clearly, but it was apparent to him that this place was of the highest degree of danger, and that caution and invisibility were key to surviving it. He had that in him, that survivor's instinct. Despite its mallevities, it had a certain charm to it, one which Thaddeus knew not to be so keen to enjoying, though the temptation was there to stray. He did not, however, for a time, and he walked along the pathway laid before him in the center of a large, dark plain surrounded by trees, and forming what appeared to be a large L shape, making a bend just up ahead. Thaddeus wondered, curiously, what might be on the other side there. He walked off of the path, staying close to the trees. Hideous noises could be heard echoing out from the trees, so he kept his ears and eyes there often, but also along the pathway, keeping sure to follow it, and ducking and crouching whenever he heard something strange. When he reached the bend, he was unsure of whether or not he should take it, but the path behind him was gone, replaced by trees somehow, with some sort of dark magic, he imagined. For how could it be anything good, this place? He took the bend. Mist shrouded everything beyond it, and he could see neither behind himself nor in front of himself any longer. He had no choice but to walk blindly into the whiteness and pray to his God for sight, or at least for some level of comfort. It was a threatening place, no doubt, but it had not yet harmed him. Perhaps it was just waiting for the right time, Thaddeus supposed. Perhaps he was already doomed here. He shook his head. He could not think like that. He must press on. He must overcome this threat, he thought to himself persistently, and so he did. Blindly he walked cautiously, though perhaps doing so in vain, and persisted through. The noises around him consisted of shrieks, scowls, growls, snarls, and screams. His fear rose with each and every sound, but he could not bring himself to give up. That was not his way, and he knew that the only way forward was, well, forward, and so he walked in that direction, and he did not look back. A time passed. Nothing. Another rate passed him by. Still nothing. He wondered if he were close to the end of the mist, and if there was an end, though the thought terrified him, so he kept away from it, tending instead to simply keep walking forward. Eventually, however, the thought got to him. He broke into a sprint. He did not know for how long he ran, but when he finally stopped, he stopped because of something he saw in the mist. The first thing he'd seen in the whiteness for how long he did not know. It appeared to be a child, or something akin to a child. He approached it cautiously and attempted to walk around it. As he passed, the child stood up and began to follow him. Its face was white with black eyes and a black mouth, wide and open. It shrieked and shrieked, but it did not attempt to attack him, so he simply kept walking, looking back ever so often at the thing, jogging away from it and back into the mist. He was almost unsure of which direction he was walking in now, if it mattered. Finally, he could see something. The creature in pursuit of him shrieked something in an odd language that he couldn't understand. It sounded harsh and as if directed at him in a way that might have meant, "Walk forward, you coward," though it was impossible to say. He wondered what it did actually mean, but by the time he had the thought, the creature was gone, disappeared into the mist, which was inching away at the very moment, dissipating into nothing. What stood before Thaddeus was a large, dark structure, something akin to a church, but somehow more sinister. It had towers with spires long and black. It appeared to be made of gray brick with a black mortar. Thaddeus wondered who might have made such a structure, as it was massive, and Thaddeus, standing before it, could only do so in awe and utter astonishment. For the first time in this place, Thaddeus felt more curious than afraid. "Let's go inside," he said aloud. "I want to see what is in there." With the words spoken, he stepped a little less cautiously forward and onto a brick pathway that led to a large doorway comprised of two large, dark gray doors with metal hinges the size of Thaddeus' head, or larger, and the handles large enough to fit 4 hands on them instead of 1. Again Thaddeus stood in awe, and again he wondered who could have possibly built such a grand place, sinister structure. Quickly he stopped his thinking and stepped forward again and towards the front door. Approaching the doors, he reached out his right hand to grab hold of the right side handle, but as he did, the doors began to open. He stepped quickly out of the way, which was a ways for a door, nearly stumbling onto the floor. He fell back a bit, falling down to one knee, and when he looked up, he could see a figure. No, more than a figure, he could see a woman. Thaddeus adjusted his eyes. Reevaluating, Thaddeus could tell that the figure in front of him was in fact a woman of some kind, though she appeared different. She had long, jet-black hair and pale white skin, covered in head to toe in a dark dress, which flowered into its skirt at the bottom, covering her legs and her feet. The only parts of her body that Thaddeus could see were her face and a part of her breasts. She was beautiful, unquestionably, and to Thaddeus she was more than beautiful. Quietly he asked for her name. "What is your name?" he all but whispered. She smirked, her eyes glowing red. "I am Meandra." "And you?" She paused a moment, assessing him. "You are Thaddeus." Thaddeus stood, his mind full of questions, but foggy. "Who are you, and what is this place?" "You already asked me that, Thaddeus," she smirked. "What's wrong? Have you lost your way?" Thaddeus shook his head, making a guttural sound of discomfort. "What's happening?" "Just relax," Meandra cooed. "When you wake up, we'll talk more." Thaddeus fell to the floor. It was some time before Thaddeus awoke. When he did, he found himself in a large bedroom, lying down on red silks and white linens, comforts he never before had known, and though he knew the words for such extravagant materials, he could barely think them, they were so foreign. It wasn't long before he found himself standing and rubbing the sore spot on his head from where he'd hit when he'd fallen in front of the entrance. He could only assume that he was now inside of that godlike structure of terror, assuming also that Meandra must be lingering somewhere nearby. His memory was full, he'd forgotten nothing, but he wanted to learn more of this place, and so he walked out to the hall. Except no, he waited for he had no clothes on, save one garment that fastened securely around he was fairly barren. "Damn it, Thaddeus, and almost as soon as he did, "Damn it," Thaddeus said, and almost as soon as he did, the door opened. It was Meandra. Thaddeus tried to cover himself, but couldn't quite manage it before she started to speak. "You're an attractive boy," she said. Thaddeus was beyond embarrassed, and didn't know what to think, or who had undressed him. It was all too much for the young man. He started to say before he was cut off. Meandra had been holding clothes folded in her hands. She tossed them on the floor in front of him. "Get dressed," she said. Her eyes no longer glowed red. "Okay," said Thaddeus, simply thankful to have something to wear. When he was finishing putting the clothes on, he took a look in the mirror, an instruction per Meandra. He was dressed fully in black, pants, socks, boots, shirt, and overcoat. His overcoat hung open, as he had not buttoned it, and his dark hair fell down over one of his eyes, shaggy and unkempt. He was glad that nobody had tampered with it, and he assumed that it had been Meandra who had undressed and bathed him. He was feeling rather violated at this point, and wanted to ask her, but could not quite surmount the courage. There was something very malevolent about her, and he had the sense that he did not want to provoke her, so again he remained cautious. Meandra smiled. "Come," she said, "you'll meet Radius." "Radius?" asked Thaddeus. "Who's—" But before he could say any more, Meandra was part way out the door. He hurried to catch up with her. When he caught up with her, he asked her the same question. Her reply was coy. "He's my master," she stated simply. "Your master," Thaddeus replied, somewhat confused. "And yours too," she added. Thaddeus was filled with a dread he was unsure he could even feel. He had no intention of being a slave, and he spoke up. I don't think so. He is, said Meandra somewhat harshly, blinking once and looking Thaddeus up and down. Come, do not misspeak again. Thaddeus collected himself and followed her lead. Perhaps it was a better idea given where he was, and that effect she'd had on him when he'd arrived. He clearly was not the one with the power here, and he would not be able to overcome this place if he was foolish. They walked down a long corridor for what seemed like a very long time. Thaddeus took the opportunity to collect some information while he was with Meandra, and so he asked her, "What was that thing that followed me?" "What thing?" asked Meandra. "That thing in the mist," he said. "Yes," said Meandra, resuming her air of coyness. "That was a fledgling." "A what?" "They are like my master Radius," she said, "only he is grown." Thaddeus thought he understood, though he wasn't sure that he wanted to, or to meet Radius. What would he look like? What would he be like? "How close are we?" asked Thaddeus. Meandra chuckled. "Don't fret, Thaddeus," she said with a malicious smile. "We are here." She gestured towards two large doors that weren't quite as large as the doors to enter the structure. When she opened them, there was a large table, long and lined with large, elegant chairs. A red and bronze chandelier hung from the ceiling over it. "Thaddeus," said a voice that could only be Radius, though Thaddeus could not yet see him, "I've been expecting you."